She has tremendous skill that she's developed, and that gift she has of sharing and applying her life experience and her training to help others, whether it's widows or other people who've experienced loss, move forward and rediscover joy. So Jody, thanks again for offering your insights to us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nancy and Barbara, for having me. And everyone, I have been a member of the Women's Forum for probably 5 years. So it's very fun to be on this side and presenting to all of you. I'm going to just share my screen. Give me a second and we'll get up and running. There we go. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for coming. The difficulty of loss, it's hard. It's scary. It's lonely. It can be embarrassing sometimes, and you don't know what to do with it. And so today I'm going to talk about, what can you do if you're in a loss now, if you have a loss in the future, and how can you support others going through loss? And really, loss is all about emotional suffering. So it's not just the loss of a person through death. It's, all the things that Barbara and Nancy have already talked about, and it touches us all. So first, I want to share a little bit about myself and why loss is so important to me and why I've made it my life's work. This is a picture of my daughters and I. I'm a mom of 3, and yes, we got to go to Taylor Swift, which was so cool. But I want to tell you a little bit of my story of what got me here and doing the work that I do. And I had a knock on the door one day at my home in the suburbs in July, almost 9 years ago. And I opened that door and looked at a police officer who was standing there, and he was holding a piece of paper. And he just said to me, "Jody, your husband has been gravely injured. I need you to call this phone number." It was a Chicago police officer phone number. And I said, "Well, okay, tell me what happened. I have no idea what happened." And he would not tell me. So I took that piece of paper, I went inside, called that number, and that police officer did not give me much more information. He really said the same thing. "My husband's been gravely injured. He's in surgery, and can I get a ride downtown?" And I live outside of Chicago. So, of course, my dad came, picked me up, got a ride downtown. But before that, 2 minutes after my phone call with that Chicago police officer, I got another call from the press who told me that my husband had been shot, and did I have a comment? And I'm like, no comment. I had no idea what to do, but that's what you see in the movies. So that's what I said, and hung up and went downtown. As I was driving downtown, I saw helicopters hovering over the Loop, which was where our offices were. And what had happened was my husband had demoted our chief technology officer, who came back to the office 4 days later and shot my husband and then killed himself on the spot. And so this was the scene. They closed down LaSalle and Jackson. And for those that know Chicago, that's a heavily populated area. So there were many people that came up to me that were there that day and didn't know it was because of my Steve. And it was a widely publicized event, which compounded the process that I went through. But fast forwarding 9 years, which is almost what it's been, I've done a lot. I took over running our business. I was a stay-at-home mom prior to that. So overnight, here I am running this big business. I sold the business. I solo parented my 3 daughters. The youngest was 9 at the time when this happened. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of emotional difficulty that goes along with that. I ran a nonprofit, and I started dating, and I stopped dating. But that will continue. But what I learned along the way about what really lights me up is I love helping women. I love helping women in the workplace because as I was in the role that I was at our company, it was a supply chain technology business, not a lot of women in that space. And so helping women navigate the workplace and then layered on grief, which adds its whole other dimension to how you work professionally. So I decided I went back to school. I got my coaching certification. I became certified through the International Coaching Federation. And that was 3 years ago. So every day I get to wake up excited about what I do and how I work with my clients one-on-one via Zoom. So let's get to the meat of my talk here. First, we all are born and think that life is linear. We're born, we go to college, we meet the love of our life, we find a job, we get married, and everything's happily ever after. But that is not the case. And I'm sure many of you have yourself encountered many bumps in the road. But the problem is society, and we're taught that it's supposed to be this certain way. So therefore, when there are bumps in the road, we don't know what to do with them. And so I will help you with that today. There's a variety of different losses. And of course, there's ones that we know that are coming, that are anticipated. And they're equally hard, but we get a little bit of front end to be able to brace ourselves for what is coming. There's unanticipated, like what I went through. There's a non-event, meaning, for example, maybe you expected a promotion at work and that didn't happen. That is still an emotional turmoil for you and is a loss. And then you get hit back to back with all the fun stuff of loss, and that's the double whammy. So I'm sure we've all experienced some of these, and there is an author who I love, Bruce Feiler, and he has a way of looking at this. And he talks about in his favorite book, Life is the Transitions, Mastering Change at Any Age. And you don't need to write any of this down because at the end, I'll give you a link where you can get all of the resources if you so desire. So he talks about all of these transitions and losses two ways. He talks about them as life disruptors. And there's about 52 of those, and you can see them here on the screen. And I'm sure probably pretty quickly you could pick out 3, 4, 5 that maybe you've already had. And some of them are small and some of them are big, but the average person has 3 dozen of these in your lifetime, which is a lot. So that's one every 12 to 18 months. Then we move on to the bigger ones, the life quakes, those that really lead to rocking our boat significantly. And 1 in 10 of those disruptors that I showed are life quakes. So each of us has the pleasure of going through 3 to 5 of these in our lifetime. And those can even last 3 to 5 years. So we're talking 15 to 25 years of our life is going to be spent in this space. And so learning how to manage these loss and transition is so important because when it happens, here we are, we're like, well, now what? Now what do I do? And we're paralyzed and we have that whole deer in the headlight look. But I'm going to help you with 7 tips to help you manage these transitions. The first one is accepting your emotions. And emotions are really hard for us. They're hard for people around us. People don't know what to do with emotions, how to express them, and how to receive them, frankly. And it's something we could do better on as a global society. And emotions are hard. They're hard for a variety of reasons. One, they can be ugly. People don't like to be that crying person in the meeting. And I'll tell you, I have been that crying person in the meeting, and that is okay. But sometimes we keep our feelings held back because they can be ugly. Another thing is we think people can read our mind. Geez, I just lost my job. That's horrible. Everybody should know how difficult this is in my life. I don't need to tell them. Well, that's not the case either, because we don't have people that are mind readers. So I want to ask you, while we're in loss and transition, what do you think the top emotion is for people? And I'll have you put it in the chat. The top emotion people experience during transition and loss: helplessness, fear, sadness, fear. Absolutely. And fear is the winner. And as you can see, the other feelings as well have significant play there. And fear within us just brings this fight or flight response, and we are frozen. It's very hard and paralyzing for us to think about what we need to do next. So things we can do, and I'll provide some extra tips in the handout, but think about, and these are important things to write down when you're going through a transition and a loss. So what really worries you is about the loss and transition? What have you done in the past when you've been through a loss? What was successful? What worked? And then what kind of positive outcome could come from going through this transition? And I'll tell you, if anybody asked me right after my husband was shot, oh, there's going to be something positive happening, I was not there. So those types of questions are not the ones that are early on in a loss or transition. But when time goes on, there is the possibility of looking and seeing a positive opportunity going forward. And that leads us to tip 2, time. And time stinks, right? Here we are in fear and yuckiness, and we feel terrible, and we just want to fast forward because nobody wants to sit in pain. And I wish I could say I'm going to wave my magic wand and make all that go away, but it just takes time. So setting that expectation for yourself of, well, geez, I've been doing this for 6 months. I should feel like massively better now. That may not be the case, and that is okay. So being reasonable with what you put in your head is so important. And if we go back to this whole LifeQuake thing, remember, it takes 3 to 5 years to heal from a major LifeQuake. And for me, I was certainly into that 3, probably pushing closer to 5 years to heal from my loss. And grief still hits me, especially during empty nesting, which is coming up. So it's important to set small goals for yourself. Just pick one thing you could change, because many of the routines and habits that you used to have don't work anymore. I used to cook dinner with my husband. Now he's not here. So now I have to come up with how am I going to change that? What am I going to do differently? And there's other examples I'm sure you can think of with losses that you've had of habits you have to change, but take it slow. This is not a time for you to have the shoulds. And it's so easy, especially as women, because we just put such high expectations on ourselves that I should be further along in my healing. I should not be feeling this way. I should be able to do everything I used to. And that is just not the case. So it's important to give yourself some grace and take a pause and actually look at how far you've come. Because so much we're in this forward looking of, okay, what do I need to do next? I should be here. Here's my goal. take a pause and look backwards and say, wow, I have done a lot. And I had a client that went through this and lost her husband 1 year prior. And she was definitely doing that. I should be further along. I should be doing these things. I said, wait a minute. Let's talk about all the things you have accomplished. She established boundaries with her mother-in-law, and those are not easy to do. She changed jobs and found a new job that could help her be home with her daughter. She came up with this really cool home exchange in Costa Rica. So I think you can get the drift. If we take a moment and look backwards, there's a lot that we have accomplished, and it's important to recognize that. Tip number 3, self-care. We hear self-care all the time. We hear that word all the time. But what I love about thinking of self-care is self-care comes from a place of power. This is you taking control of you and separating time and space for you to really emphasize your health. And we all know every day we should be taking care of ourselves, but especially during loss and grief and these life quakes, so important because we're suffering and we feel it inside and our immune system is compromised and all of those things. So taking care of yourself is so important. And as women, we like to put everybody else first. I'm going to take care of my kids. I'm going to get my job done. I'm going to check all my email and make sure my inbox is cleared out. And then all of a sudden it's 10 p.m. and you're like, well, I'm going to go to bed and I haven't done anything for myself. So don't do that. You first. And I'll tell you what, I did not do this. And 2 years after I lost my husband, I was having major health crisis. My heart was skipping beats. I could literally feel it. And I had to wear a Holter monitor to take care of that. And I looked at my therapist and I'm like, I'm not going to have a heart attack, am I? And he's like, nope, it's just stress. Stress does incredible things in a not positive way to our body. And I actually got breast cancer for the second time 5 years after my husband passed away. And so I truly believe that it was this huge, intense period of stress and me not taking care of myself that led to that. So important. There are a couple psychiatrists that actually put a rating and ranking scale together about stress and how stress can impact your life. And if you have a variety of these stressors, then, if you look at some of these and add up the numbers, if you have numbers that are above 300 within like a year to 18 months, you have an 80% chance of developing a stress-related illness. And so this isn't to scare you. It's just to say this is so important, so don't take it for granted. We're going to look at our 4th tip, which is trying something new. We talked about how we have to change habits, and that change is hard and it's scary. And sometimes we don't want to do it. So being able to just pick up something new is important. It feeds your soul. It feeds your spirit. And there's things that maybe you used to do that are not bringing you joy. They may just be a reminder of part of your loss. And so being able to shed those and know that that is okay is fine. And I like to use a reference from one of my favorite movies, and I don't know who else has seen it, but We Bought a Zoo. I love this movie. And they talk about in the movie that it's important to have 20 seconds of courage. That's all you need, 20 seconds of insane courage. So if you're going to an event and you're solo and you're terrified, just remember 20 seconds. That's all it takes. And you'll be able to do it. And That makes it easy for me because instead of looking at this humongous event, that's it. I walk in 20 seconds, I'm going to be fine. Tip number 5, seek wisdom from others. It is hard to ask for help sometimes. We are such givers and helpers. And so actually seeking out people and saying, hey, I really could use an extra hand here is tough. And I know Capstrat has talked about this in Women's Forum too, about building your board of directors and how important that is as a personal board of directors. So if you've undergone a loss, you can't take on all the things you used to do. Maybe you need someone that can take your kids to carpools. Maybe you need somebody to write your thank you notes. You'll need your financial planners. You're going to need some legal advice. So you're going to build out your team that can help you, because none of us, even on a good day, have time to become experts in each of these fields. So building that out is so important. Number 6, check your self-talk. That's, it happens when things are going well. And when it's not going well, it's so easy to say, geez, nothing's ever going to be the same. I'm going to be sad forever. This is just awful. Check your self-talk of what words are you using? Because the words that you're using and telling yourself in your mind are actually coming out in your actions and what you're doing. And so it's important to take a pause if you find yourself talking negatively to yourself. And think about it. You have all of us have been through likely a life quake, at least many of those life disruptors. Think about what you did back then that really worked well. And there's one of my favorite women who talks about and is an expert on self-inquiry. And I really like the 4 questions that she has as it relates to self-talk. And her name is Byron Katie. And her first question is to ask yourself if that's true. Her second question is, can you absolutely know it's true? Number 3, how do you react? What happens in your body, your actions, others around you when you have that thought? And number 4, most importantly, who would you be if you weren't thinking that? And I bet that will change your perspective if you go through these 4 questions. That brings us to our final tip, which is rewriting your story. Loss brings pain, joy, sorrow, and it's all of those range of emotions that makes us who we are. And being able to integrate all of those feelings into your life as it is beautiful. And it makes you who you are. And there's a famous grief educator, David Kessler. Many of you have probably heard of him. He worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on, she came up with the 5 stages of grief. And most of you know those. Those are not linear as well. He added a 6th stage of finding meaning. And I really like this concept of finding meaning. And that is not finding meaning in the death itself. There's no meaning around why my husband got shot. But the meaning is what do we take away from a loss? What do we learn from it? And how do we move forward with it and integrate it into what we're doing? And finding meaning doesn't necessarily happen right away. If you have just experienced a loss, you are not in a place to find meaning. We're going to go back to tip about it takes time. But in time, you will be able to find meaning and be able to integrate it into you. So once you get to the place where you are able to think about what have I really taken away from this experience and answer who you are now and what you're bringing to your new integrated life. I just want to talk briefly about how to support others, because I'm sure we all know people that are in the midst of loss, and everybody wants to help people. And so here are some things that you can do. Listen, I know it seems so simple, but we're fixers as people. And sometimes it's hard to just listen without jumping in and go, oh, have you tried this? Oh, did you read that? Have you been here? People really just need to have their loss witnessed, and they just want people to listen. So don't try to fix. And a good question to ask somebody is, how are you today? Because it puts that qualifier on it and makes it in a time period that somebody in the midst of loss can wrap their brain around. Check in with them regularly. When you've gone through a loss or a transition, there's so much energy and people helping you at the beginning, and it tapers off pretty quickly. So if you can just put in your calendar reminders like, okay, I want to text so-and-so every week or every month, or there's a significant anniversary of a loss coming up, I want to make sure I reach out to them. Put it on your calendar. Invite to social engagements. People who've experienced loss, not only deaths or divorce, but if you've lost your job, people might not be inclined to invite you because they're like, oh, she's going through a rough time. She's probably not going to want to come to this, so I'm not going to invite her. Keep inviting. It's important. Active service, do something for them, but be specific. I can't tell you how many calls I got of people saying, what can I do? And frankly, I had no idea at the beginning, like what people could do, but just coming up for just bring a meal, drive their kid to soccer. When you're at the grocery store, give them a call and pick up food. Just be specific in what it is. And if it's a death, share stories. People really like to keep the memory of their loved one alive. And by saying their name and sharing a memory that you have. And if you didn't know the person, ask them. So tell me something about your mother. People like talking about their lost loved one. So we have covered a lot. These are your 7 tips for managing your mindset during loss. And these transitions are an opportunity to grow. And so I want you to think about, if you're in loss or when you will be in loss, how do you want to rewrite your story? And I have put together a help you to rewrite your story worksheet, and it's called Loss Does Not Define Me. So if you would like that, and in addition, the links to all of my resources that I've talked about, please just scan this QR code, and I will put this link in the chat as well as soon as I've minimized my screen. And these are other ways you can reach me. I work one-on-one with widows, but also people in transition, because grief hits everyone in transition.